So, with the Netflix hit series of Squid Game coming to an end, and with an American version now on the horizon, I thought this was a good time to just examine the genre as a whole, and explain why I find it so captivating. And the birth of the death games genre can arguably be traced back to Kinji Fukasaku's Battle Royale. And it was the first movie to depict really anything associated with the genre. And Battle Royale has just become such a classic in cinema. In fact, director Quentin Tarantino has even said that he wished he created it. And the premise of it is pretty genius. It follows a bunch of classmates who were sent to a deserted island. They were given a map, some food, and various weapons. But they're also given an explosive collar that's fitted around their neck. The last survivor is allowed to leave the island, and if there happens to be more than one survivor at the end, then they'll all be killed. And like I said, Battle Royale really was the first movie to depict anything associated with the genre. And it does a great job at exploring the human morality and how it could disappear overnight. But it really seems like Japan was the one that embraced the death game genre. And we just see a lot of it in anime, their live action movies and shows, and even video games. And there's just a certain psyche behind death game stories that really draw people in. Media in this genre really tends to showcase just how far morality can go, and just what someone will do to save their own life. You really can't help but be interested in how things are going to end up. So there's really just a big appeal to audiences. The genre tends to take underdogs and just use their will to survive and go against anyone and whatever is intent on harming them. And the genre is also a way of just expressing the feelings of dread associated with failings in social systems. And I'm just going to go over a few of the series that I've seen. There's hundreds of titles, so, we don't have time to name them all.
1, 2, 3.
And as of right now, probably the most famous out of all of these death game stories has to be Squid Game. And I remember in 2021, this show just came out of nowhere and just took over everything. Really, no one saw it coming. But in a way, it does deserve a lot of the praise that it gets. And it probably appeals to so many people because it really brings back memories of childhood schoolyard games that we've all played. The show was also highly influenced by manga and anime like Kaiji. Both series follow people who are in financial troubles and just kind of draws them into these deadly games to win big money. And of course, keep their lives. And they both sort of comment on class differences. I will say though that Squid Game can be a bit heavy-handed with its sort of anti-capitalism message. But that's also kind of what drives the story. No one's really going to compete in games like this unless they're really desperate financially. And we also need a good reason to root for them. Greed isn't enough. We sort of have to feel bad for them. And there was an episode in Season 1 of Squid Game that I really enjoyed. It's actually probably one of my favorite episodes. And there's no death games in it, but it gets into the lives of these people who are competing. And eventually what just leads them back to the games.
Out here, the torture is worse.
And in Season 2 and 3 of Squid Game, it brought in a voting system. The players get to choose to stay in the games or leave, and majority wins. And I guess it's sort of making a commentary on how the voting system is sort of broken. But in this game, everyone can see what you voted for. So it can make you a target. And it creates this sort of two-party system where these two people are going to be against one another. So it adds another layer to what takes place after the games. But also what I find the most fascinating about Squid Game is that it brings back these memories of childhood. Just being in these massive playgrounds as a small child, and then what it's like to play these games later on in life. And just seeing the characters have to use teamwork if they want to win, or in this case survive. It really brings everything full circle. Of course, when you were a kid, you didn't die if you lost the game. But then again, to a child, that fear was all the same. The games would still have a lot of meaning to a child. And you really can't help but praise the production and look of Squid Game. It's just so iconic at this point. And I just love how they recreate these incredible playground landscapes. Just giant games of jump rope, tug of war where players fall to their death. The iconic red light, green light. We all remember these games very well. We all play them. Of course, there's also some exclusive Korean games that we don't know, but it's all the same fun. And the characters really do add excitement because we're watching each one of them interact with the same problem in a different way. For example, the main character really just wants to save as many people as he can, whereas the villains are just, in it for themselves. Maybe they need some money to pay back in the real world, stuff like that. And I really do find myself enjoying the villains each season. The one they had in the first season was just completely in it for himself, to a really funny level. And at first I didn't like him, but, I started to realize just how entertaining he made the show. And it was just fun to see, how far he could get in the games playing the way he was.
Welcome to Korea! Welcome!
And then in season 2 they really took it to another level with the villain. And there was a few villains, but most notably the Danos character. And at first I thought he was just a little bit too obnoxious and over the top. And he definitely was, but whenever I rewatch old footage now, I really can't help but be amused. He really was comedy gold and just a great actor. Also in season 2 and 3, they added this old lady character and this mama's boy. But again, at first I thought these were just gonna be annoying cannon fodder characters that you just want to see die. But their story was surprisingly emotional and tragic. A mother competing in deaf games to help her troubled son. And unbeknownst to her, the son is joining the games so that his mom doesn't have to be so burdened by him. And I will say the actress that plays the old woman definitely deserves an Oscar. The only character I didn't really like was in season 1, they had this sort of poor attempt at showing this Christian religious fanatic. But I will say they did a much better job with the crazy shaman lady in season 2 and 3. Again, at first I hated her, but she definitely was really amusing and really funny. Just how over the top she is, and she's obviously a fraud. So I say, let's get more shaman fanatics in shows and movies. Definitely enjoy that for a change. So overall, the variety of characters they gave us was just really well done. They're all very distinguishable, and it definitely helps add to the excitement of Squid Game, along with every other show about deaf games. So I thought all these aspects just created a lot of interesting dimensions to the deaf games. And I personally enjoyed all seasons of Squid Game, even though I see a lot of mixed reviews on it. Whenever I put Squid Game on, I can't help but be highly entertained. And again, it's definitely not for everyone. And even before Squid Game, most people in the West had the Hunger Games story as their first introduction to the deaf games genre. And the Hunger Games follows this dystopian world, and it uses a deaf game involving children to entertain the capital, and also to keep the other districts in line. And the book series was so popular that it eventually was adapted to a film in 2012. And I'll say the Hunger Games does a really good job at just weaving sort of class structure into its narrative. But there's also some deep concepts about overpopulation, famine, and of course, tyrannical governments. And I remember when the movie came out, it really blew up overnight. And I remember a lot of parents just being kind of sickened by the concept. But after all, it is a story about kids fighting to the death. So definitely disturbing, but again, highly entertaining. But even before the Hunger Games novels, there was Stephen King's The Long Walk. And this novel was actually published back in 1979, which sort of makes it one of the very first Death Game storylines. And actually they recently just announced a film adaptation of this, so that should definitely be interesting. And the premise is pretty simple. 100 boys must participate in a walking competition. However, they must maintain a steady pace of 4 miles per hour. And if and when they slow down, they will get 3 warnings. After the final warning, they are killed. So as you could imagine, this is just highly suspenseful and highly disturbing. And one of my favorite Death Game stories is Gantz. Both the anime and manga are an insane, crazy ride. And it's really the premise itself that makes it so great. Basically, when you die, you wake up in this death game where you have to score points by killing different aliens. And if you get enough points, you could be resurrected. Of course, these are really deadly, overpowered aliens that you have to fight, and they'll just easily kill you. But you're also given some pretty high-tech gear and weapons. And actually, this would probably be the perfect plot for a survival horror video game. You know, if anyone ever decides to pick that up, you know, it's gonna sell really well. But like everything on this list, it's the randomness of main characters dying which keeps you on the edge of your seat. And what also makes Gantz really great is just the characters and the variety. Each game you'll find these characters that you really like, and some you hate, and they do cycle through them a lot. I won't spoil anything, but I will say a lot of people and main characters die in this show and manga. And later on in the series, they definitely, find their footing with their characters and they kind of keep them for a while. And I will say that team is just excellent and I still remember them after years. So Gantz just is such a fun concept. Obviously the manga is the best option. I will say the anime is a lot of fun too, and the movie Gantz Zero that they had on Netflix was also really good. But if you had to pick one, definitely go for the manga. But just a warning, it is very insane. And politically incorrect to the max. So, that adds to the fun too. And what I mentioned earlier as just being a really big influence on Squid Game has to be the manga and anime Kaiji. And when I tell you that this is the most addictive anime I've ever seen, it really is. And a big reason why it's so good is that the creator himself loved the act of gambling. And Kaiji itself really just centers on gambling itself and why it could be so addictive. And just the excitement of being able to win big or lose it all within the act of just one decision. It really is the ultimate death game. And you'll actually recognize some pretty similar games in this that are also in Squid Game. And even just the aspects like people competing for financial gain and just the lengths people will go to achieve that. What horrible things money will make people do. But what makes this show so engaging really has to be its main character, Kaiji. And you really can't help but root for him. He's sort of a tragic character because he's someone just willing to throw everything on the line to help others. And perhaps this is his biggest flaw, but also why we love him so much. Unfortunately, helping others can put you into some pretty dangerous situations. As the Gods Will is a Takashi Miike film adapted from a manga. And it centers on a boy who happens to love violent video games, who doesn't? And one day he shows up to school and he sees a giant Daruma doll in his classroom. When the Daruma turns around, it exposes a button on its back, and the students have an option to press the button to end the game. But if the doll spins around and sees someone moving, their head will explode. With no knowledge of who's behind these crazy games, the student's only option is to continue winning to stay alive. So again, very similar concept to Red Light, Green Light that we see in Squid Game. And each level or classroom has a different dev game that the students have to play. So very much like a video game. And I will say some of these games are really weird. I kid you not, there's one where the students are dressed up as mice, and there's a giant robot cat that tries to eat them. And, the CGI is not very good. It's very cartoony. But this is coming from a manga, which I assume is better. But still, the film is good enough. It is still a fun watch. It's pretty much a cheaper Squid Game. But it is a Miike film, so it's going to be messed up, but very fun. And one film series that you might not think of with the genre is actually the Saw franchise. And it's a pretty horrific premise when you think about it. People just waking up in a death trap where you basically have to mutilate yourself to get free. And it really makes you question just how much pain you'd be willing to take to live. And a lot of the entertainment in these films just comes in the different types of traps that they use. A lot of them are actually real that were used in history. And of course, just not knowing which characters are gonna die adds to the suspense. And just the fact that there's so many films in this franchise, it really speaks volumes about how people are just addicted to this stuff. Very similar to Saw is actually the Final Destination franchise. And pretty much as far as horror films go, this is actually one of the better franchises. For the most part, they're all, decent. And they sort of create a fear of just the randomness of life. How at any moment you could just die randomly. And some of the films are really good at just sort of catching you off guard. You might think someone's gonna die and then they'll switch it to someone else you're not expecting. So, not the best films, but still, fun and entertaining. But the origin of classic death games goes beyond movies, plays, anime, video games. Goes back to her history, the gladiator battles. And these went on for many, many years. And those games were definitely messed up, the people who would actually go to watch that. But, there is something that draws us in about violence and gore. But what probably sold tickets the most was just curiosity. Not knowing what will happen. It's like a sports game, The reason why people still watch sports is you don't know what's gonna happen. And that's probably why shows like Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead were pretty popular for a while. I know they kind of got bad in the end, but there was a time when that's all people were talking about. And those shows just did such a good job at just catching you off guard. It gets boring when you're just watching things that are predictable. It's perhaps why modern movies fail. When you know what's gonna happen, and when there's certain characters that we get now that you can't really have anything happen to them, it really just kills any suspense. So I say just always keep it random, make it messed up, catch us off guard so we're interested, and just keep us guessing. So in the end, the death game genre, I'll say, is here to stay. We love this stuff. I personally may not be looking forward to an American Squid Game, but curiosity just might keep me coming back. But really what Squid Game and the other death games do the best is commentary on society. And we watch different characters and how they survive. Some people get through life really just screwing everyone around them. And some people choose to keep their morals, even during the worst of times. And people risk their lives to help others. And it seems like teamwork ultimately gives you the best chance at surviving. And we see all these different character types in these games. But the unseen horror of the games is that we're all currently in a death game. Death is random, and it's at every corner of our existence. We cannot escape it. And, death is inevitable. So the question is, are we playing to win? Are we just playing because we have no choice? And are we playing and helping others? So anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on the genre. Let me know in the comments if there's any other great death games I missed. Also, if you watched this entire video, be sure to subscribe, leave a thumbs up. I appreciate it. And if you want to discuss topics like this, I have a free Discord. And of course, if you want to support the channel, I'll really appreciate it, and you could do that through my Patreon. Link is in the description, and like always, thanks for watching.